We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister rule out any changes to negative gearing and capital gains treatment on property during his time as Prime Minister?
Order. Members on my right do not need to give commentary when a question is being asked. I don't know how many times I have to tell people that. Order. The Prime Minister has the call. Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I mean, really, they've had a long time to work out questions in this place. You know what our housing policy is. Our housing policy is $32 billion of a Homes for Australia plan. That's our plan. That's our plan. Not changes to negative gearing or other things. We actually are a political party that is saying what we are doing. Now, I know that's unfamiliar to those opposite.
Order.
Because after 3 years in the job...
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On a point of relevance, the Prime Minister was asked a very tight question. It was one sentence. We just asked for a straight answer. Will he rule out changes to negative gearing and capital gains treatment of property during his period as Prime Minister? Can he just say yes or no? Could he be honest with the Australian people?
Resume your seat. Look, order. The members on my right, no, the Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise his point of order. He's done so. The Prime Minister did directly answer the question. He mentioned negative gearing directly and it said it wouldn't be changed. So that's a direct answer. So I know what you're after, and he did give you what in this. Well, he did that. So he's done what you want. So you're going to be quiet now for the remainder of this question. Order. So the Prime Minister will return to the question.
Mr Speaker, yes, that's right. The same person who said civility is not a sign of weakness. But anyway, we'll deal with that. After 3 years in the job, this bloke has had three ideas. One, $10 billion to fund long lunches for business. Two, $600 billion to pay for nuclear reactors. And three, cuts to everything else to pay for them. They are the only three ideas that he has had. And then he comes along here and says, tell us what you won't do. Tell us what you won't do. He doesn't come along here and ask about what we are doing on housing, about the build-to-rent scheme, where I note in my own electorate, yesterday, Chris Minns was there, 500 new homes in Camperdown, just down the road from where I grew up, Pyrmont Bridge Road and Parramatta Road, affordable housing for essential workers. No doubt taking advantage of the build-to-rent scheme that was passed by the Senate last December. Just like he doesn't ask about the Housing Australia Future Fund. That's so important. Building social and affordable homes for people, providing additional housing for women and children escaping domestic violence, providing additional housing for Indigenous communities, just like he doesn't ask us about Help to Buy or about all those tens of thousands of Australians who've been helped into home ownership as a result of what we have put in place. Well, the Help to Buy scheme is something that was opposed as hostile by those opposite. They know what they're against, they don't know what they're for, and that is why they will be rejected. That is why they are floundering as not an alternative government, but as just this thought bubble that have got to find $600 billion to pay for their nuclear reactors.
The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources and Northern Australia. How will the Albanese Labor government's policies on critical minerals help build a better future for Australia? And what would make Australian workers and the resource sector worse off?
Give a call to the Minister for Northern Australia and the Minister for Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the wonderful member for Swan for her fine question. Australia has all the critical minerals the world needs for electric cars, solar panels and storage batteries, and all the rare earths the world needs for defence technologies like submarines and aircraft. And Labor is building a better future for Australia through our production tax credits for critical minerals, which I'm really pleased to say passed through the other place last night. The Albanese Labor government's production tax credit to critical minerals will bring a 10% tax incentive for more processing facilities here in Australia, and that means more Aussie jobs to build them, more Aussie jobs to operate them, and more Aussie jobs to transport the minerals and refined products that are produced. We have had much support for this policy. The CEO of the Association of Mining and Exploration Companies, Mr Warren Pearce, has said this is the first time any Australian government has put their money where their mouth is for the critical minerals industry. The incentive is a powerful strategic lever that provides the foundation for the future Made in Australia ambitions of the country. It is also the largest ever commitment from an Australian government to critical minerals. This will stimulate billions of new investment in critical minerals processing, which will be far more valuable than the incentives on offer. And of course, Mr Speaker, that is exactly the point, to put our shoulder to the wheel alongside industry to build a new critical minerals resources country in this industry in this country. This is a government, Mr Speaker, that gets things done. It gets things done for the Australian people and gets things done for the resources sector. But I am also asked, Mr Speaker, what would make Australian workers and the resources sector worse off? Well, I don't have to look too far, because there they all sit opposite me. Last night, Mr Speaker, the Coalition betrayed the resources sector. The Coalition were dragged kicking and screaming to a vote last night and then voted against production tax credits. The Coalition voted against the single biggest investment by any government in the resources sector, Mr Speaker. Look, no wonder it was really difficult to get the Liberals to vote in the other place. The poor old WA Liberal senators had to march into the Senate to vote against a policy that Western Australians support, that the Western Australian Liberal leader supports, that the Western Australian National leader and leader of the opposition in Western Australia supports, but the East Coast opposition leader and the East Coast shadow treasurer refuses to get behind. What another abysmal day for the WA Liberals in this place, where they clearly have demonstrated they have absolutely no influence on the federal coalition party room, no influence or ability to have the shadow treasurer, the leader of the opposition, step back from their really hasty, rash decision that was made on budget night last year. The coalition has voted against the resources sector.
The House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Under the Albanese Labor government, 27,000 small businesses have collapsed since the last election. Minister, how many GP clinics have closed since the election of the Albanese Labor government?
Order. Give the call to the Honourable Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll take that question on notice and see if I can get an answer to the member in precise detail. But I will say I've said since before the last election and since that the state of general practice when we came to government was its most parlous in 41 years. Its most parlous in 41 years. Bulk billing was in freefall, and as I've said once or twice at this dispatch box before, they were suffering through the impact of a 6-year freeze on the Medicare rebate. So those opposite, particularly the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, decided to freeze the income of general practices while their costs continued to rise. Unsurprisingly, they come under very real pressure. Now, over the last 24 hours, I've signed off on the third increase in the Medicare rebate since we came to government. And of the 3 increases, we've delivered the biggest, the second biggest and the third biggest increases in the Medicare rebate in more than 30 years, since Paul Keating was the Prime Minister. The Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, when she was Health Minister, did not deliver a single increase to the Medicare rebate. Of course, the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, froze the Medicare rebate. So, yes, general practice has been under a little bit of pressure.
Order. The Minister will pause. The manager is going to take his point of order now.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. The question was very tight. The Minister has stated he doesn't know the answer and that he will endeavour to get an answer. That now doesn't mean he can stray into areas that aren't relevant to the question.
Order. The Minister does have 3 minutes to answer the question. I agree with the manager. He has indicated that he will take the details on notice, but he will need to remain relevant to the question. He was asked about small businesses and the specifics around how many GP clinics have closed, so he'll need to talk about, I don't know, GP clinics or not necessarily the opposition policies, otherwise I will have to sit him down. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. And that is why, all of that is why, when we came to government, I made it very clear that of all of the myriad pressures on our healthcare system, and there are many, with an ageing population, more chronic disease and the impacts of a once-in-a-century pandemic, there are many pressures on our healthcare system. But of all of them, the one we have focused on more than any other is rebuilding general practice. So I will come back to the member with that precise number. But let's be very clear, and I'm sure the member in her heart of hearts knows this. No government has valued general practice more than this government. No government has invested more in general practice than this government. And as for the Leader of the Opposition and the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party, the worst and the second worst health ministers in the history of Medicare, we're more than happy to keep debating this issue.
Order. Give the call. The member for Page is now warned. I'd like to hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government's Future Made in Australia plan creating secure, well-paid jobs for Australian workers? Is the Minister aware of any approaches that would leave Australian manufacturing worse off?
Call to the Minister for Industry and the Minister for Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks also— oh, you should get ready for it. Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Gilmore for not only the question but for backing manufacturing, particularly in our regions. We have been focused on rebuilding manufacturing capability for a host of reasons. One, Australians want their country to be a nation that makes things. Two, strong economies have to have strong manufacturing capability. Manufacturing makes secure, well-paying jobs and very important to the nation. But the other critical issue is rebuilding manufacturing capability is important in our national economic and strategic interest. We need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and not be dependent on broken and concentrated supply chains, only relying on a handful of nations for the things that are really important to our country. It's why we stood up the National Reconstruction Fund. It's why recently we stood up the $2 billion investment plan to work with aluminium smelters to give a sustainable long-term future to regional blue-collar communities to make aluminium. But importantly, the other big step happened last night when the Senate passed our production tax credits, particularly important for critical minerals processing, as the Minister for Resources has outlined. And I want to give credit to the Minister for Resources, to the Treasurer as well, for their support on these important initiatives, really critical for the long-term good of the country. But we need to make sure that local supply chains are there to make sure we've got the things we need as we make the transition to net zero. But I'm asked about alternative plans. Where are they? They've spent, the coalition, 3 years and no plans, no policies, no costed policies in particular. And frankly, the reason they have no plans is they have no care. They don't care to be able to put forward what they think is important in the national interest. Their answer or their plan comes in one word: no. When we ask them if they'll support the National Reconstruction Fund, no. When we ask them to support the $2 billion to transition aluminium into a sustainable footing, no. When we ask them for support on production tax credits, no. In fact, their blind opposition has blinded them to how bad they look. Because we had the Australian Greens, they backed our plans on critical minerals and they backed our plans for the National Reconstruction Fund. So the Greens, while those opposite voted no against them, the Greens backed the resources sector and manufacturing, but the Libs and Nats don't support the resources sector and manufacturing. It shows you they have nothing to offer the Australian public except negativity, no plans, no care.
The call to the member for Curtin.
This is a question for the Treasurer. Governments from both sides rely on bracket creep caused by inflation to increase tax over time and surreptitiously fund their additional spending. Do you agree that indexing tax brackets, like 17 other OECD countries have done, would stop us sleepwalking into greater reliance on income taxes and provide greater transparency for taxpayers about new spending?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for Curtin for her question. Obviously, I'm aware that there are a range of suggestions around about the next steps in income tax reform, while our focus has been delivering a tax cut for every Australian taxpayer. I do know that about half the OECD is taking the course that you're suggesting. That means about half of the OECD isn't, and countries make their own decisions about these sorts of things. For us, really, one of the defining purposes of this Prime Minister and his government is to help people earn more and keep more of what they earn. The most important part of that, fundamental part of that, is about getting wages growing again. Real wages are growing again for consecutive quarters, but also the tax cuts are playing a meaningful role as well. There are more or less, to oversimplify, three different ways that you can return bracket creep. There's the way that the member for Curtin is proposing, there's the way that those opposite were proposing, which is to just return bracket creep to people who are already on the highest incomes, or that's the Labor way, the way that we have chosen to return bracket creep. And as the Treasury analysis makes clear that we released a little over a year ago now, when we made the changes to the tax cuts, the way that we chose has positive benefits for workforce participation and other benefits as well. And so I do acknowledge that governments have choices to make when it comes to how we return bracket creep. We are frankly proud of the way that we've gone about returning bracket creep, because instead of giving a tax cut to some taxpayers, as those opposite were proposing, we are giving a tax cut to every Australian taxpayer. And they are rolling out right now, and they're helping Australians with these cost of living pressures which are enduring. The final point I would make is this, and again I make this point respectfully. I listened to the member for Curtin and her colleagues on all of these sorts of issues in a genuine and a respectful way. But the difference between the ideas which are offered up from the crossbench and the ideas that we're able to pick up and run with in a government is we have to make it all add up. And we have to make sure that our tax reform priorities are balanced with our priorities when it comes to public investment, to make sure that all of those things are calibrated. But having said that, Mr Speaker, I say again I thank the member for Curtin for her question, for her interest, along with other crossbench colleagues, in genuine tax reform. And I note the genuine tax reform that's being rolled out right now in the economy.
Call to the member for Paterson.
How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australia's resource and manufacturing industries, Prime Minister? Are there any alternative approaches that would leave people worse off?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Paterson for her question. And indeed, when I was at Tomago with the member for Paterson and the member for Hunter and my ministerial colleagues, it was a great day, securing jobs there, which are so important for the Hunter region. And indeed, our government's plan for a future made in Australia is about Australian workers making more things here. I met with the CEO of Rio Tinto just yesterday as well, the global CEO who was here, welcoming the work that we had done to secure the future of the aluminium industry here in Australia. We want to make sure that we don't just export our resources and buy back the finished products. We want to make things here. We want to add value here, turning the resources the world needs into products the world wants. And last night, our production tax credits passed the Senate, opposed by those opposite, but supported by the crossbenchers in the Senate. Very important that they backed jobs, and they backed Western Australia, but they also backed our industries in Queensland, in New South Wales, in Victoria and Tasmania. Our aluminium industry is a great Australian industry. According to the peak body, aluminium is Australia's highest-earning manufacturing export. The industry directly employs more than 20,000 people, and it indirectly supports another 55,000. Australia produced 1.5 million tonnes of aluminium in 2022. Now, those opposite voted against this legislation for production tax credits last night, but they also have a record of opposing the aluminium industry and indeed wanting it set offshore. Now, the Shadow Treasurer, when he was a consultant, delivered a presentation on competition in the minerals sector. A full presentation, including a killer slide that read, "In aluminium we are missing our chance to replace..."
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition is going to pause. The Shadow Treasurer will just give it a rest so I can hear from the Manager.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. It goes to relevance. I can see the question asked for invited a compare and contrast. We're not even talking about comments from the Shadow Treasurer when he was a member of Parliament or a minister in the former government. God knows when the Prime Minister is referencing how long ago cannot be relevant even to an expansive view of that question.
I'm not sure what document the Prime Minister is reading from, but if he's reading from a document, from a presentation, he's going to have to make his answer very relevant to what he was asked about to make sure that it is directly relevant. He has the call.
Indeed, I'll certainly do that, Mr Speaker, because I was asked about the industry, and this explains the ideological position of those opposite who want manufacturing sent offshore, and they've done that for a long period of time.
Order.
And here's the quote. "In aluminium we are missing our chance to replace uncompetitive processing with bauxite exports." And by killer slide I mean job killer. That's what they want. In his case he said this: "In aluminium there are few prospects for growth. We cannot compete in processing. Australian aluminium smelting is uncompetitive on both capital and operating costs." And I note that he says that's right. They've never supported jobs here and they've never supported...
Order. Prime Minister, seeking to table document.
Yes, Mr Speaker. I table the report that shows their support for sending the aluminium industry offshore.
Okay. Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Minister, GP bulk billing rates in my electorate of Longman were at 93% in 2019 before COVID. Under the Albanese Labor government, they've fallen to as low as 79%. Australian families are already facing a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis and an energy bill crisis. Why are my constituents now having to endure a bulk billing crisis under this minister?
Order. Order. Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Why is there a bulk billing crisis in Australia?
Who
said there are too many free Medicare services in this country. Who tried to abolish bulk billing altogether? And who, when he couldn't get that GP tax through, froze the Medicare rebate for 6 long years?
The minister, no. Members on my right. Members from my right. Minister for the Environment. When the House comes to order, there's far too much noise. I want to hear from the member for Page on a point of order.
Okay, Speaker, again from this minister, the point of order is hubris. Speaker,
resume your seat. No, resume your seat, and you may keep walking out of the chamber. Look. Members obviously want question time to be robust, but that sort of behaviour is not befitting. To simply raise a point of order to do that is completely disrespectful to every member and to every Australian that is watching question time. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. As I said yesterday, I think in response to the member for Longman, when we came to government, the College of Doctors said that bulk billing was in freefall and the general practice was at a tipping point. It was very clear why that was, because the Medicare rebate had been frozen for 6 years. And as I said, I think in response to the former member, 6 years of freezing a GP's income while their costs continue to increase is going to have a pretty obvious result. Bulk billing was under enormous pressure. We've done a whole range of things about that. But I did want to talk about something the Leader of the Opposition said yesterday, and he's been interjecting across the table again, as is his wont, to the member for Sydney. He's tried to draw some sort of equivalence between a measure in the 2013 budget to realign Medicare indexation with the financial year, a measure which in the budget papers that he referred to selectively yesterday.
No, the minister's going to pause. The member asked a question about bulk billing crisis, and the minister is giving contest about why he doesn't believe that is the case. It is impossible for you to raise a point of order on relevance when you've asked such a broad question at the end of. So I'm not hearing the point of order. If it's on relevance, you'll follow the member for Page. So just giving you fair warning. The member for Longman on a point of order.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is on only because I did not ask about 2013.
No. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. Members on my right, we are going to have order today, and we are going to do question time in a dignified manner. I can appreciate the member was asking the question, but when I explained to him with a question about why do you now have bulk billing rates that are in crisis, of course the minister is going to give his view on why he doesn't think that or why he believes that is the case. I gave you a fair go. You're going to leave the chamber under 94A. Yes, the manager of opposition business on a point of order.
Well, thanks, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, the member is entitled to raise a point of order. He's entitled to be heard, to exercise 94A in the instance where somebody, a questioner, who's asking a question about his electorate. This was not a question full of invective. It was a question that referred to bulk billing rates in his electorate. He's entitled to take a point of order on relevance, seeking answers for his electorate. So, Mr. Speaker, we have an issue with him not being heard, and secondly, to be removed from the House for exercising his right is a huge concern.
So I'll just deal with this. So I was anticipating this, so I have followed previous Speaker Smith's example, who did exactly the same thing on the 29th of July 2019, when he refused a point of order for exactly the same manner, on the 19th of August 2019, when the then Minister for Population, Cities and Urban Infrastructure was being questioned. And indeed, the leader of the manager of opposition position at the time was treated the same way. So the consistency is there. So if people want to take points of order, they will give them that. Now, yourself and the Leader of the Opposition, the Deputy Leader, the Leader of the Nationals, do get certain allowances for the seniority you have. But to simply disrupt question time, when I made it clear to the House that the Minister was being directly relevant because he was asked such a broad question, is entirely what has happened before and will continue in that manner. The Minister for Health in continuation, and I'm going to ask him to be directly relevant.
Thank you, Speaker. Explaining the answer to the last part of the member's question about why we have a bulk billing crisis. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition tried to draw that equivalence between one measure in the 2013 budget that sought to realign indexation at the beginning of the financial year to his measure in the 2014 budget that sought to introduce a GP tax on every single Australian patient. And when he couldn't get that through in the mid-year budget update later that year, it very clearly says in the MyEFO papers that because he couldn't get that through, instead the indexation of MBS rebates would be frozen for 4 long years. Now, I've said it was 6 years. Perhaps only the Leader of the Opposition did 4 of those years. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison then extended that for another 2 years in 2016 and 2017. And you wonder why there's pressure on bulk billing. Unlike that, what this government did was triple the bulk billing incentive, stop the free fall, has seen an increase in bulk billing over the last 12 months in every single state and territory, and last year delivered 6 million additional free visits to the doctor.
The call to the member for Bennelong.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible economic management helping to ease cost of living pressures? Are there any alternative approaches that would leave people worse off?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Bennelong for his question and for his work on the House Economics Committee as well. He knows that the defining feature of this Labor government is responsible economic management, and he knows that we have maintained a focus on fighting inflation and helping with the cost of living. And that's what the tax cuts are all about: the energy bill relief, cheaper early childhood education and medicines, rent assistance, free TAFE and better wages. All of that opposed by those opposite, and all of that delivered while we turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 substantial Labor surpluses. Now, because of our efforts, Mr Speaker, inflation is down, wages are up and unemployment is low. Now, we know that people are still under pressure. We know that there is still more work to do, but together as Australians, we have made substantial and now sustained progress in the fight against inflation. It's why Westpac yesterday and ANZ today both substantially lowered their forecasts for both headline and underlying inflation this quarter and next quarter as well, Mr Speaker. Now, the biggest risk to household budgets in 2025 is sitting over there with his back to us, Mr Speaker. Australians would be thousands of dollars worse off if he had his way, and they will be worse off still if he wins the election. There's an election due in the next 3 months, Mr Speaker, and that means it's been almost 3 years now that they've had to come up with costed, coherent and credible economic policies, and they haven't been able to do it. All they have is secret costs and secret cuts. No costings on long lunches. No costings on their nuclear fantasy to push up electricity prices. No costings on their raid on super, which will push up house prices. No costings for the golden ticket visa that he promised at a fundraiser, Mr Speaker. And they can't even get their story straight. The Leader of the Opposition says, of course, they'll cut 36,000 jobs. The Leader of the Nationals said yesterday they'll cut, quote, hardly any. The Leader of the Opposition says that golf days are not part of their long lunch policy. The Shadow Treasurer says that they're in. Now, this is worse than some kind of harmless shambles, Mr Speaker. It's a cuts and costings con job, and it will make Australians worse off, because they can't find $10 billion a year for long lunches, or the $350 billion they said they'd cut, or the $600 billion they'd need for nuclear reactors. without coming after Medicare again, or housing, or pensions, or veterans, or natural disaster relief, Mr Speaker. And that's why this election is a simple choice, a coalition of cuts and conflict, making people worse off and taking Australia backwards, or this Labor government and this Prime Minister making progress on inflation, helping with the cost of living, strengthening Medicare and building Australia's future.
Call to the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Minister, GP bulk billing rates in my electorate of Sturt were at 79% in 2019 before COVID. Under the Albanese Labor government, they've fallen as low as 69%. Wow. Australian families are already facing a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis and an energy bill crisis. Why are my constituents now having to endure a bulk billing crisis?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
You tried to end bulk billing.
The Treasurer cease objecting. Minister for Health and Aged Care has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the member for his question. I've very much enjoyed visiting his electorate more frequently over recent times with the terrific Labor candidate there, Claire Clutterham. Well, I can tell you gets health. She gets health. I'm not sure from that question the current member for the eastern suburbs of Adelaide understands health. But I'm very pleased to get another opportunity to explain to those opposite why we've seen a slide in bulk billing. And I again say, perhaps after question time, go and have a talk to your leader about what happened to Medicare over the last 10 to 15 years, because the truth is those opposite have never supported bulk billing. The father of the modern Liberal Party, John Howard, called bulk billing an absolute rort. He fought it tooth and nail, election after election. When they finally had to raise the white flag on the total abolition of Medicare, John Howard got his protégé, the Leader of the Opposition, instead to try and kill it with the death of 1,000 cuts, by making sure that every single patient in Australia, every time they went to the doctor, would have to pay a fee. And when we blocked him doing that, instead he did second best. He imposed a freeze on Medicare rebates, which unsurprisingly caused bulk billing to start to slide. Now, we're trying to turn that around. We tripled the bulk billing incentive, which is exactly what the College of General Practitioners asked us to do. And when we did it, when the Treasurer did it in the 2023 budget, the College said that would be a game changer. And it has stopped the slide in every single state and territory. And if the member for Sturt had any interest in South Australia, he'd know that the second biggest increase in bulk billing since we tripled the bulk billing incentive has been in his state of South Australia. So I say this. We're not going to take lectures on bulk billing from a party that has spent 41 years trying to dismantle the universal health mission of Medicare, a system that we created, that we delivered, that we have fought hard every one of those 41 years to defend. And now we inherited the mess that the Leader of the Opposition created. We're fighting hard to strengthen now.
Give the call to the member for Cunningham.
My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government helping people dealing with housing stress? What have been the challenges in delivering that help, and are there any other approaches that would leave people worse off?
Call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Cunningham for her question. She's a huge housing advocate, and of course we announced a couple of weeks ago that our government is directly funding new affordable homes right in her community in the Illawarra through the Housing Australia Future Fund. Mr Speaker, we've had some good economic news recently, but there's no question that many Australians are facing real pressures right now, and housing is a big part of that picture. Whether it's families living in insecure rentals, or whether it's that generation of young people who feel that home ownership is slipping out of their reach, we've got a housing crisis in our country which has been cooking for a generation. Now, we know that the long-term fix here is to build, build, build. And that's why, after the wasted decade, the Commonwealth is back, leading on housing and investing $32 billion. Speaker, we're building 55,000 social and affordable homes around the country with our big housing build. That's part of the 1.2 million homes we're working to build with the states. We're training more tradies, we're creating more infrastructure, and we're directly investing in homes ourselves, just like the Australian government used to. Speaker, in round one of the Housing Australia Future Fund, we'll deliver 13,700 new homes for Australians. Speaker, just in that round, that's more social and affordable housing than those opposite delivered in their entire 9 years in office. And I want you to remember, Speaker, too, that for most of that period they were in office, they were so checked out of this problem they didn't even have a Commonwealth Housing Minister. Now, Speaker, unfortunately that attitude has continued to the wrecking and blocking that we've seen from the opposition on housing over the last 3 years. The opposition leader blocked the Housing Australia Future Fund, personally delaying the construction of tens of thousands of social and affordable homes that our country desperately needed. The opposition leader blocked 40,000 aged care workers and nurses from getting into home ownership, and he'll abolish that program too if he's elected. The opposition oppose Build to Rent, which will create 80,000 new rental homes. They even oppose our national housing target, Speaker. Now, imagine looking at the situation we face today and thinking that the answer is to cut billions out of our housing approach and lower the nation's ambitions. Now, Speaker, what frustrates me so much about this is that when the Liberals want to find money for the things that they value, they do it. They'll move heaven and earth for taxpayer-funded caviar and steak tartare for the boss. But God help you if you're looking for more Commonwealth investment in housing. On that side of the chamber, they're hungry for subsidised long lunches. On this side, Speaker, we're hungry for more housing. That's why our government is investing billions in social and affordable homes Australia needs. We want more affordable housing. They want more affordable corporate lunches. It's all about priorities, isn't it, Speaker?
Give a call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Prior to the last election, the Prime Minister ruled out any changes to superannuation. Why is the Treasurer persisting, for the first time in our history, to tax unrealised capital gains on superannuation assets?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It's becoming clearer and clearer to us that they had a very different question time pack in mind for today, and so they've gone back to the reserve pack and all of the old chestnuts, Mr Speaker, all of the questions that we've answered before in this place and outside this place as well, which I'm happy to repeat for him, Mr Speaker. What we are proposing to do is for people with balances more than $3 million in superannuation to make a very modest change to turn very concessional tax arrangements into concessional tax arrangements for people with the biggest balances, Mr Speaker. And we announced this policy more than 2 years ago, Mr Speaker.
Order. I'm just going to ask the Shadow Treasurer to cease objecting for the remainder of this answer. Order. Minister for Social Services will cease interjecting as well. The Treasurer will return to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. He's taken a break from trying to chase the aluminium industry out of Australia to interject about a policy which has been publicly announced for more than 2 years now. And if he's the Shadow Treasurer, he should know a couple of things. He should know that unrealised gains are calculated elsewhere in the superannuation system. If he's the Shadow Treasurer, he should understand that the arrangements for tax on superannuation would still be concessional for the 0.5% of people who would be impacted by the modest change that we are proposing. Now, Mr Speaker, in fairness to the Shadow Treasurer, he has made his opposition to this measure clear. I understand that. And so the onus is on him now to find the couple of $2 billion a year that this would raise when it's fully mature. And we know where he'll go looking for those savings, Mr Speaker. And again, that goes to the difference between the parties. We think we can make concessional arrangements at the very top end of super a little bit less concessional and raise money to fund our efforts to strengthen Medicare. Those opposite, if they're given the chance to find those couple of $2 billion each year, they'll go after Medicare again, because they did it last time. They'll go after housing. They'll go after pension indexation. And those are the choices that are available to both sides of the House, Mr Speaker, and that's the difference between the parties.
The Treasurer's completed his answer. Give the call to the honourable member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to build a better and fairer school education system? And what alternative approaches to education would leave Australians worse off?
The Minister for Education has a call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the magnificent member for Macnamara, for his question. Mr Speaker, he knows, we all know, that when the Liberals were last in power, they ripped the guts out of school funding. $30 billion was ripped out of schools, and they were so proud of it they set it all out in this document, Budget 2014 Overview. Not so much a smoking gun as it was a chainsaw. And we're still dealing with the consequences of that budget ripping $30 billion out of schools today. Because over the last 10 years, the number of students finishing high school has dropped from 83% to 73%. That's in public schools, where that funding was ripped out. And remember, this is happening at a time where it's more important to finish school than ever before, more important than when we were kids. And this is what we've got to turn around. That's what the agreements that we've now struck with Western Australia, with South Australia, with Victoria, with Tasmania, with the Northern Territory and the ACT are all about. And we want to do the same with New South Wales and with Queensland. Together, this is the biggest new investment in public education by an Australian government ever. And it's not a blank cheque. This is tied to real and practical reform. Things like evidence-based teaching, things like phonics checks and numeracy checks in Year 1 to identify children who need additional help, and then making sure that they get that help through more individualised support. Things like catch-up tutoring. A lot of parents spend a lot of money on tutoring. The difference here is this is free, and it will save mums and dads a lot of money and provide their kids with the support that they need to catch up, to keep up and to finish school, to help our children get the best possible start in life, what every mum and dad wants for their kids and what every child deserves. This is all about priorities. Free tutoring for our kids under Labor or free lunches for bosses under the Liberals. Because if the Liberals win the next election, all of this funding for free tutoring is gone. They'll rip the money out just like they did last time. The Leader of the Opposition, old Tony Abbott 2.0 over there, says he'll cut but doesn't have the guts to say where he'll cut. But you don't have to be Einstein to work it out. It'll be just what they did last time. As the Treasurer said, it'll be Medicare, it'll be pensions, it'll be housing, it'll be veterans, and it'll be this: cutting funding from our schools, cutting funding from our kids' futures. How cooked is that?
Call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, since my election in May 2022, I've repeatedly raised concerns about the rising cost of living. As your government's term ends, what real reforms will you introduce now to fix the electricity market and bring down energy prices for families, small businesses and councils who are now paying double just to keep the street lights on, with those costs passed down to ratepayers? Australia need more than just a one-off $300 Band-Aid rebate.
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question in both the capacity as a member for Fowler and as the Deputy Mayor of the council that she refers to in Fairfield. And I thank the member for the very terrific event that she and I was with, along with the member for McMahon, the member for Werra, the candidate for Fowler, Tu Lee, and others successfully celebrating 50 years, in particular, of Vietnamese migration to Australia, when refugees were welcomed in Australia and where the Vietnamese community have made an extraordinary effort and contribution to our nation. When it comes to cost of living, of course, the most important thing that we could do is to get inflation down. And what we have done is deliver inflation down to 2.4%. When we inherited it, at the time of the election of the member for Fowler, inflation, she will recall, had a 6 in front of it and was rising. It's now got a 2 in front of it as falling. And one of the things that I talked with people about there in Fairfield on Saturday evening was about the fact that real wages are increasing. Real wages are increasing. And in addition to that, the member for Fowler's electorate has particularly benefited from the fact that every single one of her constituents who's a worker, working hard for their families, got a tax cut as a result of the changes that we put in place, because we want people to earn more and to keep more of what they earn.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Fowler on a point of order.
Relevance, Speaker. I ask about what reforms will the Prime Minister, the government, introduce now to fix the electricity market and bring down energy prices?
Well, the Prime Minister was also, in your question, was about the issue of cost of living. I can appreciate that you want part of the question answered, but the Prime Minister is entitled to answer the question and to be directly relevant, and talking about inflation and tax cuts is addressing the direct relevance of the question, so he is being directly relevant, but I'll make sure he remains directly relevant for the remainder of his answer. Thanks
very much, Mr Speaker. And the constituents in Fowler have also benefited from cheaper medicines. More than $1 billion has been saved. And, of course, for an electorate with a lower than average socio-economic outcome, our cost of living measures have been unapologetically aimed at particularly assisting low and middle income earners. And there aren't too many billionaires live in Fowler, and we have ensured that everyone's got a tax cut, people are benefiting from cheaper medicines, many of her constituents are benefiting from free TAFE, the urgent care clinics are reducing the costs of people getting health. The cracking down of supermarkets is making a difference as well on inflation. And indeed, when it comes to energy, of course, the member for Fowler, I'm sure, supported our $300 rebates that are making a difference. 75, 75, 75, 75. Clicking on to those bills, reducing the bills that people have to pay, as well as reducing the bills of all of these small businesses in the member for Fowler's electorate.
Has concluded. Order. I give the call to the honourable member for Solomon.
Yeah, thanks, Speaker. My question is the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. What has the Albanese Labor government done to get through the backlog of veteran compensation claims? And are there any threats to this progress that would leave Australian veterans worse off?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Speaker. And I thank the member for Solomon for his very important question. I also thank him for his great advocacy on behalf of all of the veterans in the Northern Territory in his seat of Solomon, and of course recognise his service in our Defence Force as well. And as the member for Solomon said, when we came to government, the Department of Veterans Affairs was so severely under-resourced that there were some 42,000 veteran claims that were still waiting initial review by the department. That meant that veterans were waiting years and years for their claims for liability, so they could access health care, so they could access compensation, waiting for those claims to be processed. Back in estimates hearings in November 2022, the former Secretary of the Department confirmed that the resourcing that had been provided by the previous government for the Department of Veterans Affairs meant that that backlog would never have been cleared. The Albanese government engaged 500 additional claims processing staff in DVA specifically to deal with this backlog. We have worked through that backlog. We are now seeing claims processed faster than ever before, making sure that veterans can get access to the support and the services that they need and that they deserve. Meanwhile, though, the Leader of the Opposition is saying that he wants to cut back on those staff that provide those vital services. He's saying he wants to get rid of those jobs. And it's not just the jobs of people that process the claims. It's the people that process the invoices for the in-home supports. It's the people that make sure that taxis get booked to take veterans to their appointments. It's the people in the department that make sure hospital bills get paid, that make sure that hearing aids can be approved. All of these different staff that support our veterans, that's what the Leader of the Opposition says he wants to cut. But then we hear from the Leader of the National Party, oh, no, actually we don't want to cut any of those people. Well, we always talk about the division that's created by the opposition. I didn't realise it was going to be within their own scene about whether they're going to support veterans or not. On this side, we're about making sure that veterans and their families get the support that they need and deserve. The opposition is putting that support at risk because they are putting the jobs in the Department of Veterans Affairs at risk. That means that under the Leader of the Opposition, under the Liberal Party, but also under the National Party, we will see that Australian veterans are going to be worse off.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I ask further questions to be placed on the notice.